In clinical genetics, certain traits are rarely observed in the same brain. When they collide, the resulting neural architecture behaves unlike anything in standard literature. Take a recent single-subject case study of a 44-year-old male. His general intelligence polygenic risk score sits at the 96.7th percentile, indicating high raw processing capacity. This maps his genomic distribution. The 96.7th percentile intelligence score is clear, but right next to it is a polygenic risk for autism spectrum disorder at the 81.6th percentile. Standard models predict this score causes functional impairments and early social withdrawal. This genetic overlap characterizes a distinct physical blueprint. The data indicates a system built on contradictory instructions, one for extreme cognitive expansion and another for the neurodivergent architecture of the broad autism phenotype. Researchers classify this rare phenotype as Compensated Structural Savantism. In this profile, the expected clinical symptoms of the autism spectrum are masked by high-performance executive functioning. This masking is a physical, structural reality. The brain relies on extreme hippocampal volume, acting as the raw hardware, and prefrontal executive function operating as the regulatory software to keep the system in balance. High-capacity cognition requires this specific blueprint. It operates on a delayed timeline, utilizing hyper-reactive hardware and top-down compensation. To understand the hardware, we have to look inside the physical brain structure. According to the hyper-brain, hyper-body theory, sensory information reaches these brains faster, and it is processed in significantly shorter timeframes than a neurotypical baseline. This schematic details the hardware advantage. The CA1 subfield of the hippocampus, critical for memory, sits in the 99.8th percentile for genetic volume. Additionally, the left onsynate fasciculus, connecting the temporal lobe to Broca's area, is in the 98.6th percentile, enabling near-instant lexical access. Behaviorally, this hyperspeed hardware manifests as clinical overexcitabilities, intense reactions spanning intellectual, emotional, and psychomotor domains. Psychomotor overexcitability, for instance, presents physically. It generates rapid speech, a constant need for motion, and a surplus of physical energy. Because standard clinical settings frequently misinterpret these measurable structural advantages, they are often pathologized as disorders like ADHD or borderline personality disorder. The formation of this hyperdense network requires a severe alteration to the biological timeline of maturation, specifically a process called synaptic pruning. Normally, the brain eliminates weaker connections to strengthen circuits. Immune cells called microglia, guided by complement proteins, actively engulf and destroy unused synapses. This compares neurotypical and highly gifted pruning timelines. The neurotypical line peaks at age 8, then rapidly descends. The gifted brain remains in a dense sponge phase, delaying pruning until after 12. This gap builds a massive interconnected foundation, causing profound asynchronous development. Asynchronous development describes the developmental gap between raw, hyperconnected intelligence and an immature regulatory system. Because the gifted brain remains in the unpruned sponge phase, the prefrontal cortex, the center of executive functioning, is temporarily underdeveloped relative to the child's cognitive capacity. In daily childhood life, this lag creates significant friction. Deficits in emotional regulation, delayed task initiation, and failing basic multi-step chores. It creates a behavioral paradox. They execute highly complex tasks, yet fail simple, unrewarding routines. This temporary executive deficit supports the scale of the underlying network. The prefrontal cortex lags until the dense sponge phase completes, allowing the brain to finalize its interconnected foundation before attempting to regulate it. To successfully navigate out of this hyperconnected phase, the brain eventually develops high-performance executive function. Developing this cognitive software relies heavily on environmental input. It requires prolonged exposure to unstructured environments and manageable physical and emotional risk. Early exposure to unsupervised autonomy and physical consequences forces the developing nervous system to calibrate the difference between real danger and mere discomfort. Modern, highly supervised childhoods are designed to provide safety through constant external regulation. By removing discomfort, we short-circuit the brain's opportunity to build internal executive control. Systemic resilience and top-down cognitive control are built through the forced, self-directed problem-solving that occurs in unstructured environments. The adult phenotypic outcome emerges when the delayed prefrontal cortex finally matures and engages fully. This creates a top-down filter. The prefrontal cortex exerts rigorous control over the hyperdense, unpruned networks sitting beneath it. We see the compensation mechanism in action. This top-down control converts raw data retention, the mechanism underlying the autism and savant risk, into directed hyperfocus. The resulting cognitive metrics are high. In our central case study, mental agility and task-switching capability operate at the 99.7th percentile. Compensated Structural Savantism describes this matured state. The brain leverages its neurodivergent predisposition as a high-powered engine, steered by efficient executive software. Professionally, this architecture manifests as the M-shaped mind. It is a cognitive profile built through multi-potential interest shifting and the accumulation of serial mastery over decades. The traditional T-shaped mind relies on near transfer, excelling in predictable, linear environments where rules rarely change. The M-shaped mind utilizes far transfer, extracting principles from vastly different, seemingly unrelated domains to solve novel problems in unpredictable environments. Standard clinical frameworks often focus on the instability and intensity of this developmental timeline. However, the resulting ability to bridge distinct domains suggests assist constantly, and previous experience is insufficient. Practitioners and educators must separate the neurodivergent genotype from the compensated phenotype. Failing to do so risks pathologizing the exact biological blueprint required for high-performance adaptation in complex systems.